Lady of Lyonesse by Frederick Cowles and read by Christopher Halton. And so begins one of Frederick Cowles's more unusual supernatural tales. Far from the conventional haunted house, Lady of Lyonesse takes us to a remote corner of Cornwall where ancient beliefs have survived alongside Christianity, and where the legendary lost land beneath the sea may be rather more than folklore. For the young Reverend Matthew Cantell, curiosity about the secrets of Lyonesse will lead him towards something beautiful, seductive, and profoundly dangerous. This is Frederick Cowles's Lady of Lyonesse. In the most remote part of Cornwall, not far from Land's End and Sennin Cove, there is a tiny bay which is yet to be discovered by tourists. It is called Lyonesse and is hemmed in by tall craggy cliffs. There is a path down to the beach, but it is only known to the fishermen who occasionally use it in summertime. About a quarter of a mile inland, on a low hill, is a ruined church with a scattered graveyard and the broken walls of a house near the crumbling boundary wall. For over 100 years no service has been held in that ancient building. Owls nest in the tower, swallows dart in and out of the shattered windows, and those who are forced to pass near it do so with averted eyes, as if something evil had its home there. The church town of Lyonesse is almost a mile away, and is little more than a collection of red-roofed cottages clustering around the grim-looking Methodist chapel. There is no church in the village, nor has there been a parson for nearly a century. The people of the place are silent and taciturn. Most of the men are fishermen, but they sail from St. Ives or Penzance, and never from Lyonesse Cove. The women, when young, have a certain wild beauty, and it is said that they are the descendants of Spanish seamen who were wrecked on this coast when the mighty Armada was defeated. But they age quickly, their skins coarsen in the salt breezes, little wrinkles soon mar the splendour of their eyes, the mouths harden into straight lines, and they grow forbidding of aspect. And beyond the village stretches the mysterious moorland, with the black shafts of ancient mine workings, the beehive houses where forgotten peoples lived, and the fallen cromlechs and monoliths which were once the temples of a forgotten faith. In the heart of the moors there is a great cave where King Arthur waits to come to earth again, and the little pools amidst the bracken are fairy wells, where pixies dance on moonlight nights. The grim shadow of the moorland creeps close to Lyonesse in the winter-time, and then it is best to stay indoors with a good peat fire glowing on the hearth and a rowan branch above the door. Should you ever discover Lyonesse, you will want to know why the church is a ruin and why the spiritual welfare of its inhabitants is left in the hands of old Isaac Trewella, who is but a Methodist lay preacher and can only rant of hell and Judgment Day. But it is little information you will glean from the folk of Lyonesse. They may say that the church is too far from the village, but that could apply to many a Cornish place of worship. One, more talkative than the others, may tell you that the building was abandoned when the last rector disappeared in 1812. Perhaps you will feel encouraged to ask who the clergyman was and why he disappeared. Your informant may whisper the name of Matthew Cantell. If he does, it is certain that he will immediately regret uttering the words and vouchsafe no answer to further inquiries. You will wonder if you heard aright, and if there ever was a rector of Lyonesse of that name. Let me assure you there was. This is the story of Matthew Cantell, once rector of Lyonesse, who sold his soul to the devil for the sake of a fairy's smile. Matthew Cantell, who took to his bed a woman who had been dead 1,000 years, and for his sin is doomed to haunt Lyonesse Cove until the ending of time. The archdeacon swallowed the last of his port and belched loudly. He picked his teeth delicately, and then glanced across at the young man on the opposite side of the table. "Well," he boomed, "I think the ceremony passed off very nicely. Very few people there, but I did not expect a crowd." Now you are properly inducted and can begin your ministerial duties. I wish you well, Mr. Cantell, but I cannot say I envy you this bleak parish." "What is wrong with the parish, Mr. Archdeacon?" asked the young man earnestly. "All who have spoken of it to me seem to regard it as a place accursed. Even the bishop seemed loath to confirm my appointment." The Archdeacon belched again. The lobster was having some trouble with his digestive organs, and he felt mentally and physically uncomfortable. It was a great pity that such a likeable young man of 27 should be left to strive against the moorland and the other things that made Lyonesse a place of dread. The bishop should have sent a cleric with more experience. "There are things, strange things, told of this parish, Mr. Cantell," he slowly replied. "Yes, but what kind of things?" the young clergyman impatiently exclaimed. "It's all so vague, this talk that leads nowhere." The older man tapped his teeth with his toothpick and seemed to come to a sudden decision. "Mr. Cantell," he asked, "have you ever heard of the lost land of Lyonesse?" "What? The fabled country that vanished beneath the waves?" Matthew Cantell was obviously surprised at the question. Surely that old legend had nothing to do with Lyonesse. "You call it a legend, my boy, but wiser men claim that the story is true. Lyonesse is said to have been a fair land adjoining the Cornish coast. Its people were skilled magicians, but their god was the god of the cloven hoof. Their devilish practices became a byword, and at last the whole country was overwhelmed by the waves of the ocean. It is generally held that everything and everybody belonging to Lyonesse perished in that awful cataclysm. But in these parts another tale is told. It is said that some of the people of the lost land escaped to a small island where they set up a temple to the god they worshipped. That island is believed to be in Lyonesse Bay, and is only visible for a few hours during the times of the great pagan festivals, such as Midsummer Eve and Halloween. "But surely there can be no truth in such a wild legend," Cantell protested. "Call it that if you like. Your predecessor here, Mr. Stevenson, claimed to have seen the island and to be able to prove that it influenced Lyonesse in an unholy manner. He intended to lay certain facts before the bishop, but on the night before he was due to ride to Exeter, he was found dead in the ruins of a pagan temple on the moors." "I cannot believe it. I cannot believe it," stammered the young man. "I am sorry, Mr. Cantell. Perhaps I should not have told you these things. I can give you my assurance that I have no desire to alarm you unduly. God prosper your work at Lyonesse. My last word of advice is seek not to pry into these matters, and if ever you find yourself in any difficulty, consult the bishop or myself without delay. And now I must be going, for I have to make Redruth before nightfall." Matthew Cantell conducted the portly cleric to the back of the house, where his horse was stabled. He assisted him to mount, returned his friendly farewell, and watched horse and rider pass out through the rectory gate. "The year of grace 1811, he muttered as he turned back into the house. "The 19th century, and yet learned men speak of the lost land of Lyonesse and the worship of Satan." Susan Mencken, the Reverend Matthew Cantell's housekeeper, who had accompanied her master from Fowey, did not like Lyonesse. She took a dislike to it as soon as she saw the lonely church, the bleak cliffs, and the unfriendly moors. Time did nothing to change that first impression, and she soon found herself hating the dark-visaged people. Only a few of the inhabitants attended church, and not once had she received an invitation to take a cup of tea with a villager. Even the parson found no welcome when he visited the cottages. Susan suspected the folk of Lyonesse of evil practices, and had gone so far as to mention witchcraft to the rector. The expected rebuke was only half-hearted, and she realized that her master himself was far from happy. Matthew was puzzled. There seemed to be some dark, sinister power at work in the church town, and those few of his parishioners who outwardly conformed to Christianity mixed their beliefs with strange superstitions. For almost a year he had striven to win their confidence, to break down the barriers which existed between the rectory and the village, and to make religion a vital force in the district. What was the result? He was practically ignored by the people he sought to serve. Apart from an occasional christening or burying, his help was never required. Even the infants brought to the font were, for the most part, born out of wedlock. Once he attempted to speak of these things with the old man who acted as sexton, bell ringer, and clerk. "What is it that makes all the people so secretive, John?" he asked. "Is it the sea or is it the moors?" "Happen it's both, parson," was the reply. "Keep away from the sea when the moon is full, and give the moors a wide berth when the moon is new. That's my advice, and you'll do well to follow it." In vain the clergyman pressed for further explanation. The old man shook his head and refused to utter another word on the subject. Then, one December night, the rector was summoned to a distant farm, where an old lady was dying. He had given her the usual consolations of religion, and decided to take a short cut home across the moors. A sickle moon hung in the dark sky, and by its light he had seen a strange sight. By the monoliths, known locally as the 10 Maidens, naked figures were dancing to the music of reed pipes. His first impulse was to break into the circle and remonstrate against such heathenish practices. Then he remembered that his predecessor, the Reverend James Stevenson, had been found dead within that group of stones. Perhaps he too had seen the hellish Sabbat, and had tried to interfere. Fear entered Matthew Cantell's heart, and like a coward he crept away. He never spoke of that night, for he was ashamed to confess his lack of courage. Yet often, when he stood in the tall pulpit and preached the gospel of Christ, he found himself looking down at the upturned faces and wondering which of these people had sold their souls to the devil. Gradually a change came over him. He lost his boyishness and became a serious man weighed down by some sense of impending disaster. Always in the back of his mind was the memory of the Archdeacon's remarks about the lost land of Lyonesse, and sometimes he found himself softly quoting those lines from Milton's Paradise Regained. Fairy damsels met in forest wide, by knights of Logres or of Lyons, Lancelot or Pelias or Pellinore. No longer could he find any comfort in prayer, and the services became just a matter of monotonous routine. June came with long hours of sunshine and roses in the rectory garden. June brought to midsummer, the time when the mysterious island was supposed to appear in the bay. Matthew Cantell made up his mind to make one desperate bid to save the souls of Lishana. Some evil influence undoubtedly controlled the parish, and perhaps it emanated from that lost land beneath the sea. He would discover for himself if such an island did exist, and then he would definitely know that he was fighting the powers of darkness. Yet could he fight them? Was he not fast losing touch with the God he had vowed to serve? Was his desire to discover the secret of the island nothing more than idle curiosity? Midsummer Eve. The night was hot and sultry, and there was a hint of thunder in the air. The clergyman, seated under the shelter of a projecting rock, watched the calm waters of the bay. It wanted but a few minutes to the hour of midnight, and already he was half convinced of the folly of his quest. This story of a phantom island was but an old wives' tale, a legend of the dim and distant past. The church clock struck the hour, and as the last note sounded, Matthew caught his breath in a startled gasp. The surface of the sea was strangely disturbed. It seethed and bubbled, and then, slowly and gracefully, a green island appeared above the water. It was covered by a grove of trees, and in the centre towered a tall white building. The rector gasped at the sheer loveliness of this fairy isle floating upon the waves. Soon he was conscious of movement on the beach, and 2 boats sped towards the island. The watchers saw them approach the green shore, and then 5 or 6 people disembarked from each vessel and vanished among the trees. Filled with a burning desire to probe the heart of this mystery, he left his point of vantage and made his way to the beach by the steep path down the cliff. A small boat was drawn up on the sand, and he dragged it to the water. Within a few minutes he had reached the island, and after fastening the boat to an overhanging bough, followed the way through the trees. It led him to the white building. The structure was smaller than he had first supposed, but gracefully built in the Grecian style, and approached by a flight of marble steps. Sweet haunting music sounded from the open doors, and seemed to draw Matthew up the stairs and into the temple. The interior was dim and full of shadows. It was open to the sky, and the light of the moon fell coldly upon the white pillars and a black marble altar. Naked figures performed the motions of a ritual dance, and the air was heavy with the scent of pungent incense. In the centre of the temple, a white-robed man was kindling a fire in a golden brazier, and as this flamed up, the intruder was able to see the thing above the altar. At first he took it to be an animal, for the legs were covered with coarse hair. Then he saw the bearded face and the horned head, and knew that he beheld the very father of evil. Horror rooted him to the spot. He saw the dancers quicken their steps. He saw other figures come from the shadows and take the naked forms in their arms. Then followed a bestial orgy with wild music echoing through the white hall, and the human beings and demons struggling like animals. With a great effort, Matthew Cantell tore himself away from the loathsome sight and fled down the steps through the wood and back to the boat. He leapt into the vessel, seized the oars, and rowed desperately in the direction of the mainland. As the boat left the shadow of the island, he saw her for the first time. She was sitting in the prow, and her white hands were folded in her lap. A loose robe of green enveloped her form, and her golden hair glinted in the moonlight. Her face was that of a child, so lovely that he gasped in amazement. "Who are you, and how came you here?" he whispered. "Does it matter?" she answered, and her voice was like the sound of faraway music. "I shall be yours forever, I think, for I need your love." He, who knew nothing of women, felt the blood course hotly through his veins. He bent over the oars, expecting her to be gone when he raised his head again. But she was still there when the boat grounded on the beach, and it was she who took his hand and led him up the path. He missed her as he walked from the bay to the rectory, and believing that she was but a phantom of his own imagining, felt a sense of bitter loss. He climbed the stairs to his room, lit a candle, and divested himself of his clothing, and then he saw her again. She was in his bed, and her naked breasts gleamed like ivory. With an imperious gesture, she beckoned him to her side and extinguished the light. 2 arms encircled his neck, and warm lips found his own. Later, when the first pale streaks of dawn fell upon her lovely face, he kissed her white neck. "Your name! Tell me your name, and from whence you come," he implored. Calmly she opened her eyes, and he was afraid of what he saw in their depths. "I am called Lilith," she said, "and I was old when the world was young. I am the desire of all men, and yet I have given myself to you. Together we shall live when the world is forgotten." "Lilith, Lilith," he whispered, "may God help me. I love you, and I think you have robbed me of my immortal soul." Months later, when Susan Mencken was summoned to give evidence before the bishop at Exeter, she maintained that a woman had been at the rectory, and on more than one occasion slept in the Reverend Matthew Cantell's bed. Pressed for evidence in support of her assertion, she admitted that no food had ever been served to the stranger, nor had the rector made any mention of her presence in the house. "Flesh and blood she may have been, my lord," said the housekeeper, "but it's my belief that she was a fairy from the moors. I only caught one glimpse of her, and she had golden hair and was wearing a long green smock." Come, Mrs. Mencken," protested the bishop. You say you only caught sight of her on one occasion, that she never ate in the house, nor did Mr. Cantell mention her presence. Yet you make a grave accusation against a very worthy minister who is not here to answer the charge." "God knows I could have thought no more of him had he been my own son," replied the woman. "Yet I know he was her lover. I have seen the impression of her body upon the linen sheets of his bed, and I have heard him speak with her and call her by name." "And what name did he use when addressing her?" "He called her Lilith, my Lord Bishop." This simple statement seemed to upset the bishop more than any of Mrs. Mencken's previous remarks. He dismissed her almost immediately, and afterwards discussed the conversation with the archdeacon. "The crux of the whole matter is in the woman's name," he explained. "Mrs. Mencken says that Cantell addressed the creature as Lilith. Now, according to the Talmudists, Lilith was Adam's first wife, who, refusing to submit to him, was turned out of paradise and became the queen of demons and succubi. But much was to happen before the housekeeper was called upon to visit the bishop, and I have wandered from the actual story. When Matthew Cantell awakened on midsummer morning, the sun was shining through the window, and he was alone. Yet he was not at all disturbed, for he knew she would come again whenever he called her name. And come she did, not once, but many times during the weeks that followed. They were seen together on the moors, and one fisherman, walking from Sennen in the early evening, was surprised to see a green-clad figure dancing by a wishing well, and the parson standing by. The rector of Lyonesse knew that the green-eyed woman, with her elfin beauty, was a thing of evil. Yet he never consulted a fellow priest, nor did he, so far as can be ascertained, make any effort to free himself of her spells. In fact, it has been proved that he so far forgot his sacred calling as to allow the very church, erected for the worship of Christian God, to be used for the blackest rites of hell. On the eve of the new moon she came to him with fair words and love in her eyes, and said their marriage must be solemnized that night in a place dedicated as a temple. He knew what she meant, but was powerless to deny her request. So it came about that the Sabbath of the Witches was held in Lyonesse church, and the horned god sat upon the altar table and joined the hands of Matthew Cantell and his fairy bride. Afterwards there was dancing, and the assembled warlocks feasted upon the bread and wine used in the communion service. The old sexton, dusting the altar on the following day, found a mark burnt deep through the linen cloth and into the wooden table. He gazed at it with startled eyes, and then fled from the building, for it was the mark of a cloven hoof. On the eve of All Hallows in the year 1812, the Reverend Matthew Cantell vanished from the parish of Lyonesse, and was seen no more in the flesh. He had long been prepared for his going, for often, when she came to him in the night, the lady from the lost land would whisper of the coming Halloween. "Here I am but a dream," were her words. "When the eve of All Hallows comes again, the island will rise from the sea, and we must return together. There, in the secret land of Lyonesse, we shall be happy for ever." During the month of October, Matthew Cantell busied himself with making a record of the strange events which had befallen him. It was a queer, disjointed document, and some declared that he was mad when he wrote it. For many years it was preserved in the cathedral library at Exeter, and then in 1894 a canon of Salisbury was allowed to borrow it. Whilst it was in his possession, his house was destroyed by fire, and the manuscript perished in the flames. The whole document was never transcribed, but a small portion of it has come down to us. The concluding paragraph is worth quoting as showing the state of the rector's mind when he disappeared. "Many will say that I am the victim of a delusion. Others will vow that a fiend has gained possession of my intelligence. This I know. For centuries this place has been the home of much evil, and many of the folk of Lyonesse are witches and warlocks, worshipping the ancient gods. Some indeed may have been begotten by the lost souls of Lyonesse, at those meetings held within the temple on the mysterious island. She whom I love, whether woman or devil, comes from the vanished land beneath the sea, and thither I must return with her. My soul is already lost, for I have been unfaithful to my trust, have worshipped the horned god and lain in carnal intercourse with the fairy of Lyonesse. When midnight chimed from the church clock on that All-Hallows Eve, Matthew met his green-eyed lady on the cliffs of Lyonesse. Together they descended the steep path and embarked in a boat that was awaiting them. The green island with its white temple floated like an emerald in the centre of the bay, and she led him through the grove and up the marble steps. He heard again that low haunting music and breathed the heavy perfume of incense. Before the black altar of the horned god he joined in the hellish dance. But when the flames died in the golden brazier, and the other mortals departed, Matthew Cantell lingered on in the arms of Lilith of Lyonesse. He heard the thundering of a mighty storm and the noise of a great wind. Then the waters of the sea swirled and circled above his head as the island sank beneath the waves. L'Envoi. Lyonesse Church is but a deserted ruin and will never be used again for Christian worship. It is said that often on winter nights strange lights are seen gleaming through its broken windows, and the shadows of dancing figures appear against the glow. No boats trail their nets in the haunted waters of Lyonesse Cove, and few care to descend the steep path which leads to the beach. The people of Lyonesse Church Town are strange, secretive folk, and have no welcoming smile for strangers. Old Isaac Trewella still rants of hell and judgment day in the bare Methodist chapel. But he might as well save his breath, for the men and women of the village have that in their eyes which recks little of hellfire. They hang the rowan above their doors, and profess to dread the silence of the moors. Yet perhaps the rowan is but a sign of their sin, and their dread of the moors a thin disguise to hide their love for the ancient temples and the fairy wells. When April is ending and the first day of May draws near, there is a whispering around Lyonesse hearths. The old folks tell of a black barge which on May Eve will glide across the waves of Lyonesse Cove. Chained to the prow of that phantom vessel, tortured by the bonds which chafe his limbs, Matthew Cantell screams in agony, and at his feet, crooning a strange melody, sits the fairy lady of Lyonesse. The End. And that was Lady of Lyonesse by Frederick Cowles. This is, I think, one of Cowles's more striking tales because the supernatural is not initially presented as something hideous, but as something irresistibly beautiful. Matthew Cantell arrives at Lyonesse as a young clergyman determined to serve his isolated Cornish parish. Yet everything about the place seems to belong to an older world. The silent villages, the ancient stones upon the moor, pagan rites, fairy wells, and above all the legend of Lyonesse, the lost land swallowed by the sea. And then, at midnight on Midsummer Eve, the legend becomes reality. The appearance of the green island in Lyonesse Bay, with its grove of trees and white temple, is one of Cowles's most memorable images. But the real danger is not the island itself. It is the beautiful woman Cantell discovers sitting inexplicably in the prow of his boat, golden-haired, dressed in green, and calling herself Lilith. Cowles deliberately brings together several traditions here. His Lady of Lyonesse is simultaneously fairy woman, temptress, and demon. The bishop identifies Lilith with the ancient tradition of Adam's first wife and the queen of demons and succubi, while the people around Lyonesse understand her through the older language of Cornish fairy belief. And Cantell knows what she is. That makes his fate considerably darker. He's not simply deceived by an apparition. He recognizes the evil confronting him and nevertheless chooses his desire for Lilith over his faith, eventually participating in the very rites he once hoped to eradicate. The ending is particularly bleak. On All Hallows Eve, Cantell willingly returns with Lilith to the island, and while he remains in her arms, Lyonesse sinks once again beneath the sea, yet Cowles reserves one final cruelty for his epilogue. Cantel has not found the eternal paradise Lilith promised him. Tradition says that on May Eve a phantom black barge crosses Lyonesse Cove, with the former rector chained to its prow and screaming in torment, while the Lady of Lyonesse sits at his feet quietly singing. It is a wonderfully grim conclusion to a story about temptation, forbidden knowledge, and the survival of ancient belief beneath the surface of the modern world. Thank you for joining me for another neglected supernatural tale by Frederick Cowles. If you enjoyed Lady of Lyonesse, please leave a comment and let me know what you made of this unusual excursion into the darker folklore of Cornwall. Until our next journey into the shadows, this is Christopher Halton for Haunted Tales of Darkness. And good night to you.